Hi, everybody. Welcome to our week 3 review of the character projects. So this week, what we're doing is we're really actually taking a pretty big step in terms of Photoshop. And I know that I heard from some people in terms of their experience working on the classroom in a book exercise that it was the most challenging, and it definitely, I think it's the most challenging classroom in a book exercise that we do in this class. You'll find that the next two that we do for milestone 4 and milestone 5, those are the last two, are just going to be really, I think they're pretty straightforward. Pretty much everybody finds them, just really easygoing. But this one, which is, hold on, let me just grab an image of it. Let me just get in a large version. So this one right here, this is what you were working on. First of all, the classroom in a book exercise does have a lot of different steps, dealing with, I don't know, channels and things like that. And so it just takes some time. And then also just working with the hair, it's kind of finicky. Uh, I would say that there's really the most important thing that you are learning or kind of working on is the layer mask. So you added another object using a layer mask, or that was the goal. And I know some of you are still working with that, and that's okay. It's definitely one of the steps. And it's going to end up sort of looking like this, where you have a photograph with um, a layer mask on it. And like I told some of the folks in their comments in the submission area, um, the best place to learn about working on a layer mask, I think the most straightforward way is in the milestone 2 tutorial, which is, for this assignment, the tutorial that walks you through how to take your photographs and apply the layer mask on them. So if you're struggling with that step in this assignment, take a look at that and use those directions. I think they happen, a little bit ways into the tutorial, and then just follow those steps for adding your object into your exercise. People sort of approach layer masks slightly differently. I think the classroom in a book exercise is a little bit, not that clear, which is why we have these other tutorials available. So just keep that in mind, and then use that just to to practice your layer masks. And so once you get the layer mask, though, this concept, I think the rest of this class will be much more straightforward. So if you're struggling with it this week, do take the time to really just get a sort of understanding of how it works, like how to create one. Because once you get that, then it's just a matter of like fine tuning them. Okay, so that's one of the main things that we're actually doing. Well, is there anything else I want to say about this exercise? Um, everything else that I think we're doing here in this exercise is not as important. We're going to be using adjustment layers again. Those are pretty easy, and there's like a tutorial, like an actual tutorial in the learning path on how to do that. Puppet warp is something we've introduced where you tip the guy backwards. Remember that? That's a cool technique. Some of you, we may not need to use it again, but for some of you, I think your character projects can add a lot of great movement to your characters. And I wouldn't worry about it for this particular week, but later on, it's something you can play with, and maybe we'll talk more individually in the group critique. Okay, so that's it. So, but again, layer mask, top thing to learn this week. Okay, so we're going to head back into our group critique. Okay, so what you're doing here is you were taking your photographs and then assembling them into the kind of a basic structure of your character, like the broad strokes. And we've got like several more weeks. Let's see, we've got this week, and then 1, 2, 3, like 3 sort of more installments, you could say, that we're going to kind of fine tune it. So this week I'm going to really focus on making sure everybody has layer masks. We'll kind of try to talk about how, if we need to kind of tweak the design, and again, we'll be continuing to do that for the rest of it. And so this is just the first sort of draft of working on the character design. And that's mostly the most important thing. You were also going to be adding the name of the character, just like right here, Terrible Toys Todd, whatever your character is, any text you want, you just kind of put it in a placeholder somewhere in your design. Doesn't have to be designed at all. You just take the type tool, maybe we'll do that on somebody's. You just take the type tool and type the name for your character, use the name from week 1, that Eclipse Entertainment gave you, whichever one you chose, and just pop it in there. And then next week, what we'll be doing is we'll be doing maybe a little bit more creative stuff with the text. But for now, that's all you need. All right. Well, let's get going.
So one more thing before we get to the character project. So the character project, the instructions have a tutorial on applying a layer mask, which I've been, really highlighting that everyone should watch to work with layer masks. It's really, really good. But it kind of does the broad strokes of creating a layer mask. What happens if you've got little bits left over of the background, which happens very often, especially like in complex areas like the hair. And I noticed a lot of folks had this issue, which is, again, it's very common. And the way to solve that very easily is to actually go to your layer mask right here. So this is the image and the layer mask right here. You can see it, the black and white layer mask. You actually can just double click on that layer mask. Just double click on it. And it opens up this area in here where we can work just on the layer mask. And what I would typically do for something like this is go up into something called the Refine Edge Brush tool. Can you see right here? It's the second one down. And you can make it bigger or smaller. You can control it up here. Or you can actually use the bracket keys on your keyboard. So the left bracket, makes it smaller and the right bracket makes it bigger. And what you can do is just using one pass only. You just want to pass over an area once. You can just pass over it. See, what I'm doing here is I'm passing over it just once. And yeah, so it kind of got rid of all that extra white. Now, why don't you want to do more? And you would just do it anywhere, like if you have little bits left over, like actually you hear the mouth here. There's a little bit of the background. Let's just clip it. Okay, now that didn't work. Can you see what happened? It actually started removing too much of the guy. So sometimes Photoshop can figure it out and sometimes not. So we're going to take that back and we're going to just let that little white bit stay there because it's not really that distracting. But just one pass, and the reason why we only do one pass is if you do it more times, then Photoshop will kind of keep working at the image and it'll start doing what it did here. It's kind of pulls too much out. Like it'll make areas too translucent. Okay, so that's all you really need to do here probably to fix your issue if you have this issue with your classroom in a book exercise that we just did. Do this trick. I bet it'll probably fix it. Okay. Hi, Jolene. Okay. All right. So the first thing that I typically look at in a file, with layer masks is to just take a look right here, everybody. If you look at the your layer panel. Oh, and there is a way to make your layers if you want to make these thumbnails in here a little bit bigger. I think it's right. Let's see. Um, I think it's right in there. I always typically change it once and then never change it again. So I always like my thumbnails as big as possible. Um, Anyhow, so yeah, so all your layer masks, they're all in place, which is great. You've got the name of your character. I think your character looks really cute. I think all your photographs are good quality. And so the only thing I typically do at this point is, most folks at this point are using a white background. And what happens is because a lot of the photographs have white backgrounds behind them, if we just like disable it, you can see it's like a white background there. It's hard to actually see the selection, whether it's a clean selection, and that's always something we want to know about because the cleaner the selection, that means when we actually add maybe a different background later, then our selection will look, seamless. So what I typically do here is you can do this couple ways. The easiest way is to just create a new layer um, right above your background. And then I just take the rectangle tool and use any dark color. I can just use black here. And I just put that, just kind of throw a rectangle back there, so that way we can actually see all of these edges. And then if you want to later on, you can keep it in your file and look at it, as you're doing selections and just turn it on and off. So to me, all of your selections look really good. And the only thing that I would clean up is you see these little rectangles that are happening here. That actually happens despite you doing a good selection. for some reason these show up. I don't know why. It's like it's actually a row of pixels that's at the very edge of your original image. So it's easy to get rid of those. So I'm I I'm using the move tool here, and I always like to just right click. Um, when you right click anywhere on your Photoshop document, what it will actually show you is all of the layers at that very point that you clicked on, behind, because layers can be stacked. So it'll say layer 2 and then background. So here, let's right click. So we've got the dustpan, layer 2 and background. And you can see why labeling your layers is such a great idea. And I didn't do that here for layer 2, right here. That's layer 2. So I was a little confused, like, what's that? So what you did here by labeling the layers is a great idea. It really can save you some time. So I think probably what's happening here is that the layer mask right here, this one, so we turn it on, there it goes away. So this is the edge here. It's coming from this one. Sometimes you have to kind of reverse engineer where they're coming from. And then all you need to do here is click directly on your layer mask. That's very important, not on the photograph, but on the layer mask. And we're going to do a kind of manual correction of the layer mask using the paintbrush tool. So we click here, get the paintbrush tool, and then what we do is we use black because black hides and white reveals, and so you can toggle back and forth depending upon what you want to do. And I want to use black here, and I'm just going to make this a bit bigger using the bracket tool in here. I'm just going to, you see here what I'm doing here? I'm just getting rid of that little edge here, right here. And you can do that. So you can do that for all of yours just to get rid of those. And again, we don't see it on the white background, but if we put a colored background, like what we're doing next week, these could show up. These could show up, so it's good to fix them. And this technique is also something you can use for really anything, anybody, if you want to clean up any selection. I think these look pretty good. Let's see what's happening with your banana. We'll probably have an opportunity to do that with somebody else's. Let's see. I see. So it's kind of the shadow here. So this is where what you could do here. So this selection, now what happened is Photoshop had a hard time with this selection, which is because can you see here the shadow is actually the background, and it's all kind of similar colors in here. And so when Photoshop is trying to find an edge, it has a lot of trouble with that. So what can we do with that? We can do two things. One is you can actually manually, if you want to, do exactly what I did before, which is take the, click directly on the layer mask, click on the black color. I'm going to get a really small brush here. And you can kind of go through here and actually remove. See, all I'm doing here is I'm adding back the mask in these areas. I'm adding the mask. So you can, if you zoom in really close, you can actually kind of go in here and sort of clean these areas up if you want. So you can do that to clean up. And I noticed there's like, some areas through here too that you'd want to clean up. Or what you can also try doing, let's see here. Let's go back. Let's bring that back here. And what you can also try doing is using that trick that I showed you before with the guy and the hair, in the textbook exercise where you double click on the layer mask, and sometimes this works again, and I'm going to click on the refine selection brush right here, and then I'm just going to maybe go over this area. You see what happened there? It actually pulled back a lot of the image, like it deleted it. We don't want to necessarily do. Let's try here. So again, Photoshop is it's as smart as it is. It's not as smart as we are. So it's trying to find that edge. It's like, oh, where's that edge? Oh, let's try to find it. We can also try doing the edge detection tool in here, which sometimes works as well. That's a good technique, and it actually operates on the entire image, but it's actually also not. You see, it's not quite working either. Like, so I just want it to erase these areas, and it's actually starting to erase more than I want. not it, by erase, I should say hide. That's actually the correct term here, is that it's hiding. So nothing in here I think will help us. I think the only thing to fix this particular image is manually going in there, unfortunately. So what you could also try here is like find another banana that has something like it's sort of like this and try it with the layer mask technique and see if it works better on those edges. You know, sometimes sometimes you love the image a lot, so you're willing to go in here and start manually like working on it like I showed you how to do. Sometimes it's just better to find another image and see if Photoshop will automatically make a good selection. Okay, I hope that's helped. I love this image. This is a wonderful image, by the way, this photograph. I think it's just really beautiful, really great choice, and adds a lot of character. And overall, I think your character design again looks really. All of your photographs look really good at this point. Okay, let's see, Nelson. Okay, yes, yours looks really good too. I think your character design is really coming along nicely. You got Flippin' Food Fred. Um, And something I would just say, this is just what I have noticed is that when you have um, like your legs, because they're the same, they tend to start like they're symmetrical, which is what we tend to think of when we think of humans or animals. There's a symmetry, like the legs are the same, that kind of thing. So I would probably encourage you to choose one of these, either the knife or the spoon and use the same element. You know what I mean? Just like you did here for the spatula. Later on, when we work on the project more, we can make them a little bit different. Like we can use puppet warp and maybe bend the leg or an arm, so we can actually make them look, more interesting than just having the same item. But that's what I'd recommend. Just as a you can do that now or next week, but that might, again, that's always good for the character design. I'm actually going to do exactly the same thing that I did on Jolene's. I'm just going to skip making the duplicate layer here just to speed it up, and I'm just going to throw a background here. Yeah, that looks good. So here, what I'm looking for is I'm just looking to see if there's any edges here that we could clean up, and I think these look all pretty good. There's a tiny bit of white in here. I don't think that's going to be a problem when you put a background on. The thing is, what we're looking for is we're really trying to look for anything that could potentially be, um, a flaw later on, like in terms of the selection. But pixels, by their very nature, they are not precise. It's not like working in Illustrator where you get perfect mathematical vectors when you draw. When you're working in Photoshop with photographs, as we know, are by their nature made up of these little tiny pixels, and they're all tiny little different colors. So when we try to make selections around edges, we try to do the best we can, like the better quality photograph you have in terms of resolution, the better the contrast between the object and the background. All those things help us make a good selection, and then working with that selection. But ultimately, we can never make it microscopically perfect. Every selection is probably going to be a little bit, when you zoom in, it starts to look a little bit, funky, and that's typically very normal. So we're just trying to make it look realistic to our eyes. So when we put a background behind this, it's probably, we probably won't notice very much at all there. That's probably, especially depending upon the colored background. Okay, I think that's all I wanted to say here. I'm actually going to just undo this to go back to white. Just wanted to get something here with your spoon. So yeah, so can you see your spoon? Can you see your spoon is quite pixelated? I noticed that when I looked at it even further away. Whereas compare it to, well, this is a little tiny pixelated too, but compared to this guy, which is pretty seamless, this one looks a little more pixelated. So if you can, I might try to find a different spoon. That should be really, and for some reason your knife is as well. I don't know why that is. Um, Hold on a second here. Hmm. I think yeah. I don't. I might just take a look at that. If you can find a more high resolution spoon or knife, I think that might be good. A little bit more detailed. That'll give it more detail. It won't look so kind of like it's it's got that kind of watery quality that sometimes happens with when things are low resolution. So you can give that a try. I know you took your own photographs, so I don't understand quite how that's happening. Uh, Anyhow, well, you might want to take a look if you have your original photos, your higher resolution photos. You might want to try dragging them in again and seeing if that helps. Let me know if you have any questions, but I think that's something that's pretty easy to solve. Okay, Amanda. Okay, all right, good. Thank you for your comments there. It's always nice to, it's not required to have any comments when you post the character project, but it can help me to focus in on things that maybe you're, wanting some extra feedback on, or, um, yeah, let me talk more about that in just a minute. So, okay, Garden Glitter Grace. I actually really like this text that you added here, even though I know it's just placeholder text. I think I like the color, but I, of course, feel free to experiment with it later. I just wanted to say that there's something about it that I think is quite nice for your character design. And overall, I think your character design looks really good. I love the skirt that you chose, and this flower has a lot of dimension. The rainbow, it's very cute. Overall, I think it's looking really nice. You've got your layer mask in place, which again is really one of the most important things we're doing. We're going to continue to experiment with the character design itself throughout the entire, class, the rest of the class. But getting the technique of the layer mask down, even if you don't feel you understand it perfectly or you're still kind of experimenting with how to make good selections in a layer mask, just being able to do that layer mask, that is really the most important thing that we're really working on this week. Um, so let's just, okay, I'm just going to do that little technique of just looking at any edges here. Yeah, that looks really good. Yeah, you did a great job. You had some really difficult and challenging selections here, especially in here. I think you did a really nice job with that. I don't think I really see anything at all to work on. So great. Yeah. Um, So, okay, you mentioned that you're not sure about the eyes. It's really interesting because yes, I would agree with you. I'm not really fired up about the eyes myself, even though I thought the way you built them is great. And and so this is where sometimes when you have this is where I think critiques are so valuable because a lot of times, more often than not, I think we already have a sense of what's working and what's not working in our own designs, whatever design that is. Sometimes maybe we don't, but most often I think we're like, not sure about that. And so when somebody else looks at it, even if it's like a non-designer person, people don't have to necessarily be designers or artists to be able to give you feedback on your work, but somebody can come along and go, I'm not sure about that, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, my instinct was right. And so to me, that's really the one of the most important purposes of the critique. It's not because somebody is saying this is good or this is bad. It's that somebody is reinforcing your own intuition about your design, and that strengthens that intuition and makes you a better designer because then you start just independently making good choices for your designs. um, but having said that, I've been in the kind of the visual world for a really long time, and I still like getting critiques because um, it helps me to see things in a different way, and also just to reinforce that instinct of that's not necessarily working. And also just the last part of this is that sometimes people maybe just say, I don't know if this area is working, and they might give you a suggestion. Well, why don't you try doing this? And I always try to give really specific instructions because we have such, or not instructions, I should say, sort of ideas about how you can fix problem areas. Unlike when I was in school, where somebody would just say, it's not working yet, go and work on it, and I'll talk to you next week. That was my background. We would do that for like weeks, and I'd just work on it and try to fix some problem that I wasn't sure what it was, which is a good approach. But we have these very short classes, And I really feel like we don't necessarily I don't know if it's really valuable in our particular situation if I just said, well, it's not quite working yet, keep working on it. So that's why I give specific feedback. But the downside of that is that there's so many different ways to solve a problem in a design that the specific kind of direction I might give, there's many other ways to do things. So it's kind of like, you know what I mean? It's like it's good. It's good to give specific directions, and that really actually, when I had a few people who did that with me in school, it really helped me. But at the same time, it sort of takes away some of the inventiveness of problem solving. Anyhow, that was like a general class comment. I hope maybe some of that made sense. But yes, so I would say I would experiment, like what happens if we take off the leaves here? Let's just take these all off. Can it still be a head? I would say it can actually. I think it still functions as a head, and what it actually does when you take off the eye, like those elements, is you actually see the beauty of the shovel. The shovel's a really beautiful element, the color, the way, the metal, the texture, also the way the light is hitting it. Also this kind of element here, that kind of reads as a neck. It all works. So, and then it also highlights the leaves. So oftentimes, I mean, there's a reason why less is more. The phrase less is more is, something you hear in design all the time because it is true that less is more a lot of times. Okay, so the other thing, so these branches, I would still look for other branches for your arms. I think these are okay, but they don't seem to be um, if you can find a branch where you're able to kind of select a whole bit of it, like the end of it, so it's not cut off or you have to cut off areas, to make it work, I would try that and also try to find a branch that has more light and dark on it. Like this, like see you see how this has light and dark where the light's hitting on one side? That will make it look more branch-like. Because what happened, with a small element like this, it's hard to even know that this is a branch because it's so small and the lighting isn't as round as even like the rainbows, you've got this round quality, so even though it's a very thin element, it's pretty clear what it is. So I hope that made sense. So that's what I would maybe experiment with a little bit more. Overall though, it's looking really good. Alexandria, sure, yes. It's always great if you are working, we have a deadline happening and you're still, have things that you want to work on. It is great to be able to post your project and get feedback at that point and then use the rest of the week to work on your project. Um, so I'm actually going to put your background back here, which is great. You've got a black background, so that's great. And just take a look here. I think that, so you've got your layer mask here in place, which is great. Oh, okay, that's interesting. It's a black background here. And I think your rose looks really good. Your leaves look really great. I like that kind of transition to the leaves. I would say that the body here, hold on, I didn't quite get that body. There we go. There we go. You might keep experimenting with this body a little bit more. I think it's kind of cute, like I love the kind of like translucency of it, but I think that it makes it hard in this particular project to do a layer mask on this because it's so kind of frilly and transparent. So I might see, experiment, maybe you can, brainstorm some other ideas for the body that might be, give you that kind of shape. You're looking for that kind of sort of ovally type of shape, but that maybe has a little bit more definition along the edges. That's why selecting the rose and the leaves worked so well, is because they were very defined edges. And Photoshop likes that. And I might even suggest the same thing with, let's see, this one here. Yeah, so this also has like the edges are a little bit, kind of indistinct. again, I might experiment. Well, let me just move this layer up a little bit so that we can see that bottom a bit more. Or actually, I'm going to turn that off. Well, see now that's actually looking a lot better when we actually see it. Um, so yeah, maybe it would be nice if it was a little bit stronger color too. It's like again, it's a little faded, but I think that could work. So I might just sort of experiment with that. Maybe the leaves could be a bit smaller, so you could replace the torso, move it a little bit up, so we could see more of this bottom. I think it would be nice to see that. Um, and the branches too. I think maybe I might work a little bit more on choosing a branch. I'm not sure why I'm having trouble selecting. Like a branch that is a little bit more like heavier. Like the pussy willows are so cute, but they are so light and fragile of an element, visually, that it's very hard to make that selection. And that's why you were struggling with that, is because it's just a hard thing to select. So maybe something that is a little bit more solid. Again, like think of the rose and the leaves and how the selections look so great for those. Okay, so that's what I'd work on a little bit more. Just kind of work on that. If you can, maybe just clean up some of these little lines here of any photographs you use, just like we did before. And then you just want to make sure you have your name as well of the character. So maybe give yourself a little bit more room, like maybe make everything just a tiny bit smaller or move things down, just rearrange it a little bit, holding the shift key down here as I do that, so that you can put your name uh, of your character. And I'm guessing this is probably Garden Glitter Grace. So we just do that by going to the top of our stack of layers here. This is the easiest way to do that. You just grab the horizontal type tool and just anywhere in here, you just type in your your text. Make it a tiny bit smaller here, of course. And just pop that in. It doesn't really, again, at this phase, it doesn't matter, what your text is or anything like that. Just kind of give it some room, find a place for it, and just pop it in. Okay? All right, so I think you're headed in the right direction. You know how to work with layer masks, which again is so important. So I would just kind of experiment a little bit more with the character in the photographs and just apply some layer masks. And again, you know, if a layer mask is not working very well, then that's often a sign that your photograph maybe doesn't work very well for this particular project. And it's good to just find something else. Again, like when you have layer masks that are working really well, it's again because Photoshop is happy with those images and is able to find the edges, and mask the background. And those are the type of photographs that you want to work with. Hey, Margaret, okay, you also, I think, have done a good job here at working with your layer masks, which again is like the key thing we're working on this week. And I'm just going to do the test here just quickly. Yeah, that looks great. Look at that. So I'm just kind of looking for any edges here, and I don't really see any for the selection. So that's great. So I would just experiment more with your character. To me, it's not quite working yet as a character. Like I don't really see it as something that's living yet. And that's what you're aiming for, is to try to figure out how to make your character come to life. How can you do that? Typically, we try to model it on something that is like in nature, like a person or an animal. So for example, like maybe you need arms, maybe you need two legs, maybe, however you want to work on that. Maybe the head needs to be a little bit more, obvious. Like let's pull that, like for example, if we pull the head up a little bit, I think you'll probably have to make everything a bit smaller to fit. Um, so that the head is maybe kind of coming out of here a little bit more so that it starts to read, so it's kind of experimenting with it. Let's just take that tissue paper to the side for the moment. So I don't know, kind of experimenting with it. Like maybe I immediately thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting to reverse this? To like turn the margarita upside down, the glass. I didn't do a great job. I would sort of, so you can kind of maybe it would become sort of like part of like this could almost become like a skirt or something like that. So kind of experimenting with it again, trying to make it look. I'm not, again, I mentioned this before that this flip-flop is probably not a great choice because it has so much detail on it. So maybe just kind of take that out right now, find a really simple flip-flop if you want that. So maybe there's going to be some arms that you could work with, you know, figures, just kind of experiment with a little bit more. How you could, you know, I'm not sure about the tissue paper, sort of how that would relate, but you can sort of start seeing how that might work. So keep experimenting. I might even go back to some sketching and do some more sketching of your character. Because oftentimes when you're working in Photoshop, you can spend a lot of time working on things that you could easily sort of work out a little bit more in the sketch form. So kind of like just kind of think about how can I make, if a margarita glass is going to be your main sort of central sort of body element, how can you build on it to make a character? Again, is it going to have feet? Is it going to have arms? Um, how will that all fit together? And then lastly, just make sure to put the name of your character. I don't remember which one it was, but whichever you chose from milestone one. Okay, so keep working on the design. Austin, you're looking for a new raisin. Yeah, sometimes it's just really hard to find the thing that you really want. So sometimes you can kind of maybe even find something different. Like if a raisin doesn't work for the eye, maybe a sunflower seed works or something else. So you can experiment with that. Okay, so let's just see here. You've got your layer masks here, which look great, that you've got them all in place. Perfect. Everybody's doing a really good job so far with that. So I'm just going to take your background here and just do what I did before, just to kind of see how your selections work. And look how good they look. Yeah, they look great. So I would say with yours too, I would just keep working a little bit more on the design. The first thing I just want to mention, so at least how your character is looking now, it's a little more on the horizontal side, where it's kind of like more long. It's like a bird shape. So I would just take the crop tool. Let's see, I think I have that hidden somewhere. So the crop tool and just, you can kind of like make your format of your canvas reflect the orientation of your design. So something like, you can always change it later. So something more like that actually can frame your design a little bit more nicely. And then what I would do is just experiment a little bit more on trying to turn it into a little bit more of a character somehow. Like, let's see, you've got these leaves here. Let's just take this shadow out. Is this a shadow here? For the moment. You can add shadows later. Maybe just skip that for now, even though it's so fun. Or maybe just turn them off in your. So maybe try to figure out how can you make these look more wing-like. I don't know, So you might have to really experiment. This is, I think, where you'd really have to experiment a little bit with it to see. I don't actually have any thought in mind here. Sometimes I know what I'm doing, but I'm just kind of turning them around to see how can we try to get them to look a bit more wing-like. And I don't think I've necessarily done anything better. Because what's the challenge here is that they're both tending to kind of blur into each other, like they merge into each other because they're quite similar. So, so you might have to experiment with that a little bit more. Um, hmm. Yeah, yeah, I don't know. Maybe other elements. Well, let's leave that for now, and let's see what we have going on here with the head. Okay, so the head's tucking in there. I'm actually gonna take it right back to the way you designed it so that we can see that. So I'm just sort of really looking for opportunities here for how can we make this look more like a bird, like for a creature that's living. Because right now it's still not quite there. Um, and it's a little more challenging what you're doing here, I think, than the average character because you're working with a bird. And so let's just let's turn off the wings for a moment and see. So maybe maybe you need some feet. Um, so I might experiment with that. I and then maybe you need to experiment with different types of wings, or maybe just so right now. Let me again. I'm going to go back to your original design here. Okay, one thing I'm wondering. So let's see. This is the left wing. I'm wondering if what you should do here is maybe what's confusing is that you've got two leaves kind of overlapping each other. What if you hid this leaf? Do you know what I'm saying? So, like for example, in here, like in your leaf here, if we'll just take the paintbrush tool here and hit, oops, hold on a second here. And then hid this leaf. I'm going to do a terrible job here. I'm just going to kind of go over it. I wonder if that would maybe make it more like a wing. Just that one. Yeah, maybe that's a little bit better. So, okay, so yeah, so maybe that would be the solution is that now we have this sort of single leaf and that's already starting to look more wing-like, you know? So maybe try something like that. The other thing is, well, you could start from there and just keep sort of like looking at it and trying to evaluate how to make it as lifelike as possible. Like again, maybe it does need some legs. Maybe this little element here, maybe you need to find a photograph that is a little bit maybe more turned on its side so it's more pointing. So right now it's sort of like kind of it's sort of like angled. Maybe it needs to be more flat on. You know what I mean? So like so that it's like turned a little bit more. So I would just keep experimenting with your character. Um, One of the amazing things about Photoshop, like any digital file, is that you can save your digital files as you're working, and actually instead of just working on the same file, like you could take this file and save it as version 1, version 2, version 3. And so with, in a couple hours you can go through like 10 versions of your design and then have them all saved, then open them all and then look at the one that you think is working the best. Unlike, working in traditional media where we can't do that. Okay, well, I think it's coming along. Make sure to put your name of your character somewhere in your design. And yeah, just keep experimenting. Now, again, we're going to keep experimenting with the characters throughout the project. But I think the more that you can sort of build in some of the broad strokes at this point, sort of kind of get it working, generally speaking, as a character, the better shape you'll be in for next week. Elizabeth. So I think this is Rockin' Rhapsody Roy, right? Yeah, so just make sure to put the character name somewhere. Okay, so I think you've got a good start to your design here. I like the cassette tape for the body and the legs here look cute. And I like the microphone, or I would probably choose one of these to be your arms. Microphone's pretty cute. Um, and then, so if we look in the layers panel, what I'm noticing is that what you did is you actually deleted the backgrounds from these layers. And what you really want to be doing here at this point is hiding them using the layer mask. So I would go back to the instructions for this assignment and just follow along, rebuild your file from scratch. That'll be the fastest. Um, Making sure that you you add a layer mask that hides your background. And again, those instructions are really good. They're really easy to follow along. So just follow along. If you run into any problems, and this is true for everybody, just head over to Thinking Storm and ask a tutor to help you. Um, with anything you run into technically, because they can share your screen with you. And then the other thing you want to mention, I mentioned this before, you may not have seen my feedback in previous assignments, is that for this project, because we're in Photoshop, we're using Photoshop as it was sort of designed to work with. We're really looking with photographs, so we don't want to include any elements that are non-Photoshop, like all of the ones I just deleted in this eye. So find photographs that you might want to use for those elements. I don't think you need a mouth, but you probably do need a head. So maybe find an object that could work as a head. Something that is maybe circular and related to music. Um, okay, so that's what you want to work on here. As I mentioned before, just the idea of symmetry. I mentioned that earlier, with regards to the arms. Like, I love the idea of having two legs that are the same. So I would pick one of these. I probably would not pick this one because it has a lot of painting on it. And painting on objects tends to make them look more graphic, like more sort of flat. Whereas this microphone is just a really nice element, nice and round, and three-dimensional. So I'd probably choose this and use this just duplicate it and use this for your other arm. Okay, all right, so you got a little bit of work here. Again, just really, even if you can't, complete your entire design the way you like it, make sure you apply the layer mask this week and get as far as you can. That way you'll be in good shape for next week and you'll have learned how to work with layer masks, which again is such an important concept.